You're listening to the Art Said podcast, episode number 19, a conversation with Bruce Mack, musician, educator, and arts organization administrator. Welcome to the Art Said podcast, conversations through the perspective of the arts and education, hosted by educators and artists Shauna Longo and Edric DeBose.
Oh, here we go. So, hey, Shauna.
Right.
Hey, Drew. How you doing?
Hey.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So, today we're speaking with Mr. Bruce Mack, who is a musician in New York City, well-known, a band leader, educator, an administrator for a national arts organization, Black Rock Coalition, a performer with the Burnt Sugar Orchestra, solo artist, right? Just released a new single amongst many singles you've released. The list goes on and on. So, and some of that will be made clear as we have this conversation. There's plenty to talk about. Bruce, thank you very much for taking the time to be here, man. Appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome, Edric. It's an honor to be here. And nice to meet you as well, Shauna.
All right. Thank you. It's lovely to meet you as well. Any friend of Edric's is a friend of mine.
Hey, it's good to have friends.
Well, it is.
Just to restate it all, Shauna and I started this podcast mostly to continue with the conversation that we've been having between the two of us about art education, especially public education. So the arts in public education primarily, but it's extended to all the different ways in which that reaches the community, reaches other people, and how it works in the lives of individuals. So that's really what when we kind of try. We want to try to stay with that, even though there's plenty of other things to talk about in this conversation. A lot of different directions we could go, given your background and given our history. So, but we want to start with, like we do with the other interviews, of talking about you as a young person getting involved with the arts, right? So, or getting involved with music. So, what did that look like? When did you have that first experience of saying, "Oh, this art thing, or this music thing, or this is something that I understand, I relate to, I like this, I want to do more of this"? How did that happen?
That happened when my brother was babysitting me. We were living on 153rd Street in Manhattan, and between St. Nicholas and Amsterdam, if I remember correctly. And he was babysitting me, and we would sing. I can't remember it to this day. It'll come back to me somewhere. We used to sing the Chef Boyardee commercial, and we had music playing in the house. The radio was, the thing,
right?
And my mother loved listening to music and stuff. So when I would listen to him sing that, I remember the day I kind of started to join in with him, and because he had this great voice, he had this falsetto, he used to sound like Eddie Kendricks, Nice. And I would want to join in with him, and we'd sing that Chef Boyardee commercial. And I started kind of like something was spinning with that. It was just a joy in it. And I don't remember what I said or what I would talk, but I know I was always kind of like curious, and I would ask him, or my mother often asked him questions. And I started to talk to him about something about music, or ask him what he was doing, how he could sing like that. And he expressed that he was taking up some music in school. At one point, I never saw him do anything like that at that point, or maybe I just wasn't paying attention. And then he showed me this trumpet. He had this trumpet in the case. I had never seen this trumpet, but all of a sudden he directed my attention to this trumpet, and it was every bit of, I don't know, maybe 5 feet in front of me, and he opened that thing up, and this was the moment. The glow of that trumpet.
Wow.
It was like a
yes. And that lasted for a moment. I was like hypnotized, and I would look at it, and there would be days where he might walk into the kitchen or go somewhere else in the room, and I would kind of creep over there and just open it, and that brass glow just really hit me. So something was connecting during that time, and I wanted to hear it. And it was funny because to this day I had never heard him pick that, or saw him pick that trumpet up and play it. But it was a thing. And at that point, I'm guessing I don't know, maybe I was 4 or 5. So by the time I got to 3rd grade, I wanted to play horns. I was listening to horns at that point. I was listening to a lot of music, whatever my mother was listening to, I was listening to. and I just loved horns, and I immediately connected horns with the voice for some reason, and I wanted to play horns. I wanted to play some brass, and I went to elementary school, and I went that third grade. I met Mr. Spidell, first music teacher, and I told him I wanted to play. He asked, "What instrument you want to play?" And I wanted to play trombone. I'd seen, I don't know who it was I saw play, but I loved that sound of that low end, and what it was able to do, and the fact that it could slide. It was a slick fly instrument to me. And he said, "Well, we have two trombones in the school, and there are two students who are already playing those trombones. But the baritone horn uses the same size mouthpiece, and you can play it." And being my character I wasn't like I didn't get sour about that. I was like, okay, you know, I'm gonna
They
be
got
on the
something
horn.
for me. I'm happy, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. And that horn, and you held it a little differently, and you had the valves on it. And I jumped into that and started, learn how to read the F clef. And
So
that was that start.
so that leads to school performances, right? Is that so you're performing in front of other people now? That starts to happen?
Yes.
Okay. So
I
because
started
I'm
performing, and it was funny because I probably remember the moments I had with him in learning in the class than I do performances at that time
okay.
in school. Um, he made more of an impression on me, just kind of welcoming me into the whole thing, and the fact that I was holding that instrument. That meant more than everything. That has the memory. The performances at that time, I don't remember.
Because it was that process. It was the process and the community that you felt being connected with this ensemble, right? And the
Yes,
opportunity to perform with others in this place.
yes, yes.
that's where I was trying to go. I was curious about when the making of music starts to become something that connects you to people. You realize, oh, this music has a place not only in my life but connects me to other people.
Hmm.
So I mean that probably comes later on. But so I'm curious, when does that start to happen for you?
That's interesting. I think there was when I started to listen. I was listening to a lot of stuff. I was really as a kid, and that had to do with my mom. And I'll bring her up a bit because she was very. She and I, we had this relationship. We could talk. She wasn't like some like a lot of new parents are. They like friends with their kids. She wasn't being my friend. She was being my parent, but she was always like kind of like educating, so it was fun, and she enjoyed it. Like we'd have this conversation, and it would be like laugh and share the music. And I got really curious about people she was playing, and she would turn me on to people, and we'd sit in on Saturdays. We'd do the plaid stamp book for A&P, collecting plaid stamps and listening to records. That was the thing.
Yes.
And she would put on stuff, and I was getting to that point where it was like, okay, I already saw the trumpet, so now who is this we're listening to? And she turned me on to Etta James. I remember the days Etta James, Lambert Hendrickson Ross, and King Pleasure. I remember those three, and there was some more, but I remember those three because those happened in one day, and I was boom. That was
Mm.
when the vocal thing really, really hit me. Um, it was shortly after. It was probably around. It was in, and I know it was. It was actually in '68. 68. We went to visit a cousin of mine. I forgot his mom's name. She was a distant cousin, and my mother knew it because my mother had come from Florida, and they had cousins up here, and they were kind of looking out when she got up here. So we went to this cousin, and her son is named Peanut. So I remember Peanut, and we was on 116th Street. We were right across the street. We could see the mosque, actually, the mosque across the street. So we were right there, and there was a lot going on. It was crazy. You remember, what 1968 was like.
Yep.
It was wild, and there was a lot going on in the street. And she took me over there. It was a Friday night. She was going to work late on her job. Actually, she was going to do an overnight at a job. She took us to cousin to stay. Parents do. Oh, Peanut, take Bruce in the room, show him your music, your toys, whatnot. And Peanut was obviously a little older than me, obvious to me anyway. He was a little older than me because of what he had. He had records already. He had a little record player, and he was playing some cool stuff. And I was listening. I had already been listening to Sly and the Family Stone, but I wasn't really paying attention to everything that was happening. And the newer records were out. I think he did two albums that band did in that same year. And the one that got me paying attention, he played that night. It was a Friday night. He played the Stand album. And he played a few things, but then he played Stand, and that really got me. It made me, I started to pay attention to what was being said, and it was was it Everyday People?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Everyday People.
I may be wrong. My own beliefs are my song.
Yep, thank you. And I started to listen to that, and it kind of informed me, not in an intellectual way or a way that I could reinterpret it yet. It was years later that I could reinterpret it. But what I did get at that moment was that, an artist, a musician, or an artist can say these kind of things. There was liberty that you could speak that way. That stayed with me. That stayed with me forever. I was liberated. I was informed. I didn't know what to do with that at that point. I wasn't trying to compose anything yet at that point. I was nowhere near that. But I knew then that, people that do this can say that. They can talk like that. And we had that freedom. That was the moment, that really opened that door for me. When I started to do it, after I formed, I was doing a doo-wop groups. I was in high school, and I had these groups out because I was into doo-wop. I was all over the place. So I was just kind of like trying to bring my friends together and meet them where they were, and they were all in these vocal groups. We were like vibing with the Jackson 5 and all the other doo-wop groups that weren't necessarily band oriented, Blue Magic and whatnot. So we were forming our groups like that. So I was doing all of that stuff, covers. But I always had this little thing I wanted to write. I think the first verse song I wrote, I was that pop thing had me. I had this little song called "She's So Fine." I mean, I kept that song forever. We moved a few places, and that song stayed with me. It was like my only song. I remember getting it transcribed and everything, and that was like the breaking point. I was like, I got it transcribed, and that was like, and I remember feeling like, okay, that's the end of the song. It was like got transcribed because I didn't know where to go with it at that point. But after that, I started forming bands into high school. Started forming bands, and I just didn't want to write about anything. I wanted to write about like some like real socially conscious things, But I didn't have the intellect to really do that. It was a lot of great people. I'd already been listening to all these great writers and poets, and I didn't feel like I really had a voice to like convey those things. I understood what was happening, but to convey them in a creative way was a whole nother program, for me. So I just started to kind of write down things in an abstract way, and that's where it really started to formulate. And my friends and band people were like, well, maybe that's not necessarily the thing we want to do because we're going to cut off some of our audience trying to do those things. So I was trying to balance those things out and do them in a way that they weren't so obvious, and it just started to develop more and more. Then I started to get a little more creative where those things I could do them in a way that they were kind of like, shaded or, I put them in, I could slip in things, I could say little things here or say a chorus that really stood out and meant something, but everything else was kind of like friendly to everybody.
So where did those two things start to meet, though? I'm curious about where those two things really came together for you, because I got to know you with Rebels Be Funky and PBR Street Gang, So, but at that point, you had a group of musicians who understood what the content was and what the direction was, and they agreed with you. So
it was in PBR Street Gang. Okay. My friend Ken Edmonds and I formed a small record label. We wanted to put our stuff independently because it didn't seem like we had a way into the big machine that other great artists had. So we were doing, it was the 80s, mid 80s, and we said, hey, let's just do our own record label. And we wrote a song called Chemical Pollution. I wrote these lyrics. I was like dealing with chemical pollution and how pollution was affecting everybody. And I wasn't into rap per se. it was more like a spoken word thing, but I just jumped right into it and did it with the whole rhyme scheme and rap. We created a beat, had some drum machines, created a beat, and I wrote about chemical pollution. Chemical pollution is all around town, kids getting sick, people's lives going down, blah, blah, blah. And that's where I went and I started making points. Mentioned some of the famous nuclear plants and things like that and how it was affecting water. That's when it really hit me. And it felt good because people were accepting the content. It was getting big on college radio. So I was like, oh man, people are willing to listen to that kind of thing and speak there. So I felt, I could walk with my chest out now. And now that was the door that opened it so I could speak out in that way.
So this is interesting for me because it's part of what the podcast and part of what this conversation is about advocating for certain ideas, right? So you're advocating for certain kinds of ideas in terms of social policy and finding an audience, right? Those two things are beginning to come together. So I'm curious about how that starts to connect with your work with two different things. One is Arts Connection in terms of going into schools and working with young people. And the other is an organization like the Black Rock Coalition, which you were president of for a while. So, so I'm curious about how those things begin to come together for you. So, if you could just speak just for a minute about what it was to advocate in those ways in public schools and also with the BRC.
The BRC, I had already, there was just this stereotypical idea and mindset about what Black artists are in general in the music industry. And it started to become clear to me. I was not totally aware of that. I had a sense of it. But I could tell just by the way we were rolling, trying to be a band, the places we would play, what people were willing to hear from us, that there was a particular type of mindset. And I was like, and it made me realize, it's like, wait, where are all the people that I could talk to? Where are the people that think like me? Where are all those musicians? Because up until that point, they were all on record. They were all the people that I was buying the records of. And I was like, wait a minute, there must be a lot of people, others like me out there. Where are all of those people? So I started to see them. My buddy Ken Edmonds, he well-read and knew folks, started to take me out to like some other venues. We started and we went to see Vernon Reid and his group Living Color, and they were at these small bars in Lower Manhattan. And that was the first time I met Vernon. Fortunately, he's one of these people that has this great memory. He just doesn't forget people. He remembers them. That's one of the great things about him. And I met him there, and he was doing all these tunes that had something to say. And I remember one was called Funny Vibe. And it was about walking down the street and, some white folks would feel uncomfortable around him, and he could see the discomfort in their body language and in their faces. And he would wrote the song about why you want to give me that funny vibe. No, I'm not going to harm you. No, I'm not going to rob you. So and so and so. And I was like, okay, there's the next person that's got that mindset like I got. There's other persons doing this, and they're great musicians, So there was that connection. Vernon, because of what he was doing, he remembered me, ran into me in the subway with a number of other people, and said they were forming this organization called Arts Connection. At that point, we ran into him on the day I was picking up my test pressing for chemical pollution. At this point, having previously met Vernon. So now he's telling me about this organization that's starting. We're going to have a meeting next Saturday. Blam. In that meeting was Craig Street in that was West 4th Street train station. Craig Street, Michael Doc Green, Greg Tate, and Conda Mason. And Vernon, all of them. If you can imagine that. It was like right there. So they said we're having this meeting. Comes to that meeting. I got there early. First person I meet is a lawyer. Don Eversley. We chat up each other. Then all these other brilliant people gradually start to show up for this meeting. And next thing you know, it's like this place is just, smoking with conversation. Folks are like talking, and it was like all these people, all kinds of gear, wearing all kinds of stuff. And I was like, where have these people been? These are my people. This is like the space age of Black folk,
Yes.
This is like the future.
Yep.
you know, and
And it
it
was.
started to really come out then, and it was potent, and it's like, oh, now I'm gonna write this other song. This other song can come out, and that whole movement, you
Right.
know, in my mind, for me, I guess my own movement really
Mhm.
kind of began then. I felt confident. I felt like there was a support network to do that, um, and I started to grow within myself, within my own band, and started to expound on that. Now, in that, doing that, one of the things I've always liked doing, because I used to babysit all my nephews and nieces, was doing education. I always had this thing for, like, if they were younger than me, I wanted to share something. I was into martial arts for a minute. All my nephews and nieces, I would take them in on a day, and I would show them, because we lived in some wild neighborhoods, and it was like, I had grown up. I spent time. I was born in Brooklyn, but I grew up in Harlem in the Bronx. And Harlem, just like, you grow up in Harlem, and it just teach you how to, like, look, you can't let that go by, because then you'll always be looking behind your back. It was like I had babysitters who would literally march me down the street. It's like, let's go deal with this right now.
Mm.
So by the time I moved up to the Bronx,
Mhm.
I saw nonsense going on, and it just wasn't gonna, like, we
Yeah.
can't let that go. Just nix it. So it was never no issues. I had nephews and nieces. They were younger than me, and I felt like I had to look out for them. So I was always babysitting and kind of teaching and found ways. So understanding kids. So got to a point where I needed to work. I was just doing this music, but I needed to work, and I didn't want to work outside of music at that point. At that point, I had been a messenger. I had been all kinds of jobs, but I didn't want to work outside of music. And I started to, I mentioned it, I can't remember who it was, but somebody told me about an organization called Arts Connection, and I basically went in and mentioned what I did. And I didn't initially get a position to teach, but I got a position to sort of manage. They call it a site coordinator. And it was basically like you basically managing an artist, but you're the go between the artist and the person that booked them. So you would handle all the administrative work, and paperwork, make sure they got paid, make sure they were there on time, make sure that whatever classes or group of people they were going to do lectures with or workshops with were there on time, and they were the right ones who were selected, blah, blah, blah. All right. So I started watching how a number of other people were actually teaching. And one of my favorite um, artists was a gentleman named David Pleasant. And David Pleasant is from the Gullah Islands.
Okay.
His family's from the Gullah Islands. So he was playing all kind of banjo tunes I had never heard, these African American tunes that we know, but he understood how they were supposed to originally be played. He had that. He had bells on him, on his ankles, everywhere. He played that, and he could play multiple instruments. And I was his site coordinator for a couple of years. And I would watch how he taught, and I really loved how he taught. He had an assistant with him, and I kind of absorbed and mimicked a lot of what he was doing. But I had always had my own way, and I always liked to improvise. So I got involved in that, and it was about, I guess I was in about maybe three years with Arts Connection,
Okay.
where I told them, I have an idea that, about teaching some music to a group of kids, because one of their artists was gonna, like, leave their position, and David was one of those. Actually, it was a couple of artists were leaving to do some other things. I said I would like to take those spots and continue where they were, and they said, well, let's see how you would develop that and work it out. Would you be willing to participate in the Summer Teaching Institute? So they had one, and I decided to do that. And I did that and demonstrated how I would teach something. I think the first, I came up with some little quick lesson on using uh, 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 how to decipher DNA, that basic structure. I don't know. I was reading on this whole thing how they did it, right? And I said, I'm not, I wasn't trying to really learn that, but I found it interesting. And I took the first part, and then somehow, to this day, I don't remember. It's like learning how to gamble that first time and you get beginner's luck. I took that little scenario and did a music lesson and taught other teachers. And I did it in like 45 minutes. And they said, well, great, this will do that. Then they said, well, we need you to write that up. How would you teach that 45-minute lesson in 3 hours? How would you teach that lesson, that 3 hour lesson in a week of sessions? How would you do that 3 hour lesson in 3 months, period? Because that's how they were booking artists for different schools. They'd come in, maybe do a one-off. Then they'd come off, maybe they'd do a 3-day session. And then sometime they'd be there for like a month, maybe 2 months. So I would stretch it out.
So let me ask a question. So what I'm curious about is, so as you're teaching, as you're finding a way to take this information, understanding, and put it into a little package that you can hand to a child. And again, it's gonna be different depending on the audience, depending on the age of the kid, the type of school that it is. But what did you find to be the most important things in terms of how you package that and how you offer it? I mean, so when you're teaching a student, what is it you're looking for in that child in terms of their response? I mean, I'm curious if you could talk about some of how the kids received it and what it did for them.
Usually, I think the first thing I would look for is their engagement,
Yes.
how they were engaged, and I would try to.
Yes.
And because that reflected on me a lot, it was like, okay, how do I keep them engaged, and how do I draw? First of all, how do I draw them in, and how do I keep them engaged?
Mhm.
And that would be the first thing I'd look for. And I'd try to find. I'd look in the eyes. I'd look around the kids and see what they were interested in what I was saying, because I'd often start off with some kind of talk, and fortunately I could be a little animated, and I was I always joke about myself being like a drill sergeant, because I got that little military want to be a cop kind of look sometimes, but I'll joke, and kids can see past that. That was the beauty. Kids can see past all of that, so they can see your silliness right away, and they'll jump right in. So I would look for that, and then what I would do is I would capitalize a bit. I would, play along with that they found out who my person is, and now I would try to incorporate and bring them in a little bit more with what I was actually teaching, share my experience, my personal experience with them, and then try to find out, does that interest you? Do you know anybody like that? Anybody in your family like that? So I want to get to know them. That would be the first thing. And then now I would demonstrate what it was I was talking about and try to have them participate in it. But I would simplify things. I would talk about sometimes things that were difficult. I remember one time wanting to talk about giant steps. And, people would do giant steps, and they would say, oh man, the kids, if you're going to do giant steps, they got to learn that harmony, those changes, and do this and that. I remember I said, what I would do is I would put on the song, because that's how I was introduced to a lot of music, and that turned me on. So in the classrooms, what I would do is I'd put on the song and watch for the reaction. I remember putting on, it was a second grade class, and I put on giant steps. The first thing they did, they jumped up and they started to dance to giant steps. I lost it at that point. I was like, oh, this is the bomb. I put my hands up like that. I said, okay, we win it now.
You realize you figured out the secret sauce that so many educators can't figure out in their entire career of how to reach students, which is amazing. You did. You figured out the formula, right? That secret sauce of and every class is a little bit different, and because it's different kids and it depends on their situation and where they are, but it's being willing to meet kids where they are instead of where you are.
Yes.
And I think that's so important, right, Edric?
Yes.
So let me say something. So I think we have to wrap up now, but I'd like to finish with this, if I could. I'd like for you to talk about Greg Tate for a minute, if you could, because I think you can't really say enough about Greg Tate. And I think about who he is especially I have this memory of meeting Greg Tate at, you remember, New Music Seminar, right? Mm-hmm. So it was a hotel downtown, and I went to go see Tate, and I remember he was so excited. We were signing up for like different slots and different venues. He was like, it was like a teenage kid. He was like, he was just, oh, we're gonna tear it up, and then at the same time you read his books, because at that point he was a nationally known writer, right? Mm-hmm. And the depth of what he had to share. So I think there's something about Greg Tate. Like I said, I really don't think you can talk about this man enough. That he understood the importance of of what was inside of Black culture,
Hmm.
and especially the importance of creating organizations that allowed for a legacy, allowed for access, right?
Hmm.
So I'm curious about what you got from him and from that experience. And again, the continuation of Burnt Sugar. But so we're wrapping up here. I'm just kind of curious if you have something to say about Tate and maybe about arts organizations and the power of the arts and music.
The, I'll try and do that in a nutshell because there is a lot. It's more than
Yes.
anybody could even
Yeah.
imagine to say about Greg Tate.
We
You
could probably
know,
have a whole
just
episode or two on Greg Tate.
Absolutely. Yeah.
yes, and you would need a lot of people to do it. It probably can go on for a long time. There was often things we would say like Greg has read things nobody else has will never even get to, the things he knows. But the thing that impacted me that I'll mention is this: that one, Greg Tate, Gregory Stephen Tate knew that you you're not gonna in order to learn all of the things about Black culture, you got to be a part of Black culture,
Okay.
and you have to and one of the things he knew to do was to bring that community together so that they
Okay.
can learn from each other, and sometimes that might be um, uncomfortable, and which he would do in a humor. He would always display in a humorous way within the band in Burnt Sugar, by sometimes saying, "Hey, we're gonna all do this," and then surprise us with maybe a guest we didn't expect and change up the scenario 1 minute. So he kind of threw us off, kept us on our toes, you know, and kept you working and made it a point to say like, well, this new person I just brought in is important too, so you may want to get with this program and find out who they are. So it was always this lesson going on. The other thing was that he embraced you, and he embraced you for he could identify that quality in you that meant something, and he
Mm.
could big it up and show just how big it was to everybody. And that's one of the things I think is really missing by him being gone, because everybody is aware of that. He could he knew how to point out how important something was that seemed very minute to others, and how essential it was to what we were doing at a given moment. And I'll wrap that by saying I remember him pointing out to me he would always, not always, but he did it several times and that was because of my nature. Sometimes I'd fall back and let others take a spot where they didn't need to. And he mentioned to me a couple times when he was trying to put me in a certain place, he said, "You need to claim your righteous, you know,
Mm.
position.
Okay.
You need to be there." And he would big you up like that, and he
Mhm.
put you and let you know that if you decide on do something, you should do it. My thing with that and claiming that spot, I think it is important for people like ourselves, yourselves, both of you, to do what you're doing now and to be encouraging to other artists to not just do their art but share their art constantly in every way possible with younger people, with children, and allow them to formulate and then constantly, feed them with ideas, encourage them. You're always going to guide them. There's always going to be somebody who is trying to give them good direction. So you don't have to do everything, but what you do, as long as it's positive, is to stay in their life and kind of like constantly give them ideas and encourage them, show them like structures. I give them like I'll give kids structures. Like improvisation is a vast thing, but I'll give kids in my lesson framework that they can work in and find those different lessons that you learn in improvisation, as opposed to giving them this is how you do it. Here, let me give you a framework. Go inside that frame and paint what you want. There's corners there. You can create a circle in that frame too. Do what you want in that circle, and then now let's look at it. And they'll go back and they'll want to like maybe fix things. I was like, don't fix it. Let's go to the next frame. Do something
Right.
different next frame.
Yeah.
Let them know that there's freedom in the art, and at the same time you can learn and develop, continuing to do your craft and your art and whatever it is you like doing.
Right. You create the opportunity for the experience because the experience is where they learn. It's not just you
Exactly.
telling them, it's them
100%.
experiencing it. And that's where the learning takes place. Yeah.
Exactly.
Cool.
Well, this was fantastic. Thank you so much for
I
joining
was
us
surprised.
today.
I
It
did.
was so
Oh, that
lovely
happened
to
in a
meet you.
nutshell. I actually said that with some space behind it. You as well, Shauna. You as well. Thank you for having me on, Edric.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for introducing us and to have me in this platform. Makes the Sunday even better. I don't even know, because now you got me lifted. This is what happens to me with kids. I'll go in one day, it might be a rainy day, and it'll be like, okay, I don't know if I got anything for you. As soon as I'm in their face, now I'm lifted. I don't know what to do. I got to go somewhere, maybe try to have a glass of wine or something to wind down, because now I'm lifted, So that's how y'all got me today. Now I'm
Yeah.
There it is.
Well, good. Hopefully we inspire you to the rest of your day. All right. Thanks everybody for listening. We'll see you in our next episode.